Hey everyone, so before the video starts, just gotta let you know that I had some video problems, so some spots I'll have to cover it up with a full image and you won't see my face. Just letting you know when you see the weirdness in the edit. Anyway, let's get into the video proper, and thanks for watching. Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L here to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 327 on a Monday morning. Hey everyone, thanks for waiting for the video, and here we are. Alright, 327. So you might have seen my spoiler video for it. Seeing the proper chapter, and also talking to some of the live stream crew, I've kind of rethought some of my opinions here. But overall, with chapter 327, I think it's going to be a fun one to talk about. In terms of what we got, it was pretty much a setup chapter with a little bit of slice of life, which I really appreciate. And ultimately, when it comes to the critical notes, one thing about the chapter is that this is ultimately this chapter features a lot of competing rhetorics, and I'll point them out as we go through. But there is a lot of interesting notes that are being said. And on a critical note, like you as a reader, you have to really decide who exactly you're going to put more weight towards when it comes to the competing rhetorics. Now, on a grander scale, what is the point of having characters have competing rhetorics? Really, this kind of stuff comes about when an author has forgot the themes, or they're like kind of doing a different theme for a particular chapter. Like for instance, sometimes early in a story you might have one particular moral, and then by the end of the story you might have a completely different moral. And when you look at the two morals, you might see that, wait, something here is a little bit wrong. I think examples of where you could have seen this might have been in Naruto. Where in Naruto, when you have Naruto versus Neji, there is a big talk about destiny and the role thing versus free will. But then by the time you get to the end of Naruto, you realize, well, Naruto was born special. I guess I should be saying that a big part of the conflict was that Neji was saying that people are born special. Or yeah, how that ties into destiny. And then by the end of it, even though you had Naruto saying that he was wrong, you find out, well, no, like probably a good portion of this had to do with who Naruto was born as. So it's things like that. Well, actually, Naruto, because it went so long, has other spots. For instance, the revenge message. It's not so much that revenge should not be done, because ultimately when Shikamaru wants the revenge, everyone's okay with it. It's not that revenge is bad, it's that your revenge has to be so hardcore that it's final, right? That you end the cycle right there. Naruto makes that big deal about ending the cycle of hatred, and they want to do that with talking. Another way to end a cycle of hatred is to just put a full-on stop to it and bury someone beneath your family's property. Anyway, that's one version of competing rhetorics. In Naruto's case, it's kind of wider. It's more this is more of an issue with the narrative. Competing rhetorics within a series, when it's appropriate, is usually when you have characters arguing. And in that case, when you have those characters arguing, you will sometimes end up with a character that is wrong and a character that is right, and that might be intentional for the story. For instance, when you look at this recent bit of Hero Academia, Izuku and All Might are ultimately sort of in the wrong, just because they're the ones whose failings are being acted upon the most. So when you look at the competing rhetorics here, ultimately as a reader, you have to kind of decide who you think is more correct. And you have to say more correct because at the end of the day, the way that Hero Academia is written, people will be made to have the correct points, and that's what makes this part a little bit interesting. Because as we go to the future, what we have to be wondering is, well, will any of these people be proven incorrect later on? Like, will Izuku be proven incorrect about something he says? Will Shoto be proven incorrect about some of his fears? I think there was one more person that had a weird rhetoric here, but I don't really recall. Yeah, we'll have to see. Anyway, with that said, that's the general notes. Let's get into it and talk about the chapter. So, the first page is just a lovely page with the boys helping out Izuku. I am kinda sad that Shoji ultimately wasn't here. We'll talk more about that later. But it was a really fun beginning page, and I gotta say this again, I really didn't think we were actually gonna get this bath scene. I am legitimately surprised, and I'm very happy. I wish we got more, but again, did not expect the bath scene, and it was ultimately very adorable. Still think it's a big jerk move of these people to not have gotten Izuku's little mask guard or whatever, but whatever. Alright, page 2 is a wonderful little page. We have the return of the lovely Horikoshi faces. I love these little faces whenever we see them. Now, there are a few details here. You know, you have Izuku being dunked head first. You have Bakugo with the ding dong right below it. That was a really nice touch. Now, I don't know if you notice here, because Kaminari's butt's in the way, but if you look at the back, Koda was actually here very early on. We do see him in the next page, but it was kind of neat to see that little scribble in the background. Anyway, another lovely page for the slice of life, but there's not really much else to analyze here aside from saying that Bakugo is funny. We move into page 3. We have the note that Bakugo hasn't really changed, but we know he's kind of changed. You can't really change overnight. We have wonderful things from Bakugo in page 3 in general. You have Bakugo doing what I think is a cannonball. You have Bakugo acknowledging everyone as a rival. And you have Bakugo trying to say Izuku, which he was able to pull it off. He's trying to beat habits. I think that was really lovely. But again, the problem with Slice of Life is that there's not really much else to say other than, oh, this was really cute. We move into page 4. And this is where I can start really talking about things. We see the Yue Heights. We see that Uraraka is sleeping. We get to know that other people are sleeping. We see that Uraraka is wearing oven mitts because her quirk will activate. Now, the thing about the oven mitts, I do wonder if the quirk is activating on them now because all 5 of her fingers are touching it, so it should be floating. But the point is, she's not making her bed float. But that's why she's wearing the oven mitts. Now, any critical things to say here? Well, yeah, I'm going to echo some of the things I said in the spoilers. I find it really unfortunate that Uraraka ultimately is not talking to Izuku. I don't know. You know, it just makes me feel a little bit... It just makes me feel a little bit bad on the inside. I mean, if you tell me that, you know, she just got a sense of relief and she went to sleep, I can be like, yeah, you know, that makes sense. And along with Uraraka, we have Tsuyu, who went to sleep as well. Tsuyu is... There is just so many weird things about this. But other than Tsuyu and Uraraka, who are, I think, the more critical one. Actually, no. Everything here is critical. Tsuyu, Uraraka, Toru, Shoji. Tsuyu and Uraraka going to sleep is weird. Shoji, Hagakure, and Aoyama going to sleep is suspicious, and I feel like this is the author knowing that people have theories about these 3 people. Because why pick out Shoji, the guy that is going to be getting an arc, that the author is still reminding us about? Why go with Hagakure, who has suspicion on her, and why go with Aoyama, the weirdest person? Also, Hagakure and Aoyama have not had any kind of significant chat with Izuku about what he means to them, in the same way that the other characters have. Why remove these people? It's just mind-boggling. And I have to think that it's partly because the author knows about the suspicions when it comes to Hagakure and Aoyama. With Shoji, he might as well be the traitor as well. I mean, he's one of my crack picks. It's just really odd. Now, when it comes to Uraraka and Tsuyu, Tsuyu is the girl who had a big moment about crying in front of her friends because of the things she says. That girl, again, who had such a big moment, is missing and asleep. And then you have Uraraka, who has moments at least equivalent to Bakugo and Ida, and she also is knocked out. It just feels really... It just doesn't feel appropriate. Again, I understand being hit with a sense of relief, but at the same time, it's like everyone else stayed up for Izuku. You know, why these people? Now, as a reader, I don't have any insights as to why it removes Tsuyu from the writing standpoint. For Ochako, I can come up with a reason why you would remove Ochako, and that's because you want to limit how much she talks to Izuku. The reason you want to limit how much she talks to Izuku is because you want to limit whatever payoff's going to come from that chat with Izuku. Or you want to... Like, I can conceive of reasons why you want to artificially distance them. It's just, again... It leaves a bad taste in my mouth. That's ultimately how I feel about it. And I don't want to play the comparison game, but I'm looking at Ida, and it's like, yeah, Ida stayed up for Izuku. Bakugo stayed up for Izuku. It's just unfortunate. That said, that's all I got for page 4. Moving on to page 5, where it's a nice moment where everyone's talking about the realities of Izuku being quirkless and then being given a quirk. We also have the very funny stuff happening in the background of Mineta trying to pull off a Shoto and being told that it's an expulsion out of 10. Again, a wonderful little detail. This is the chapter of little details. Page 5 is used as a segue into Izuku feeling bad about the way he treated All Might, and we move on to page 6, which I think is probably one of the funniest pages. I don't really understand why All Might had to do the things he did in this page, but still funny. Now, this page is interesting because this kind of says that the chapter is relatively fast-paced, just with the way that it flowed. You have All Might in the window, you have Shoto pointing it out, you have a quick time skip just to say, okay, All Might came into the house properly. You can see that he's wearing indoor shoes. That's pretty good. You have All Might ultimately bowing down before Izuku. Now, you guys remember, I said that All Might was going to be bowing down before Inko. I'm pretty sure that if All Might gets the opportunity, he's going to bow down before Inko. But, you know, All Might bowing down before people and apologizing for just being not that great when it comes to helping people on personal notes. This is ultimately All Might. This is the same All Might that we've seen with Night Eye. And you have the wonderful moment with Mina just flat out saying, hey, apologize to us too. Of course, All Might completely ignores it. Oh, wait, speaking of someone that got ignored, I just ignored Tokoyami. Tokoyami has a little thing where he sets up that he's really worried about Hawks. And you have Tokoyami fuming at Izuku on page 5, saying, I wish you had told Hawks to answer his phone. So that was just kind of funny. It's just interesting how he was fixated on it. Anyway, back to All Might. At the end of the day, All Might has communication problems. I think it's pretty hilarious that you have Mina shouting at him, and he just completely ignores her, leaving her with this face as he talks about the battle that will decide it all is close at hand. Now, in terms of this, the battle that decides it all, I really think there's going to be at least 2 or 3 more battles. Well, at least 2 more battles. I feel like maybe we'll have All for One battle, and then we have Attack on Yue, and maybe depending on how the author wants to do it, 1 more battle after that, in terms of big, wide-scale things. That's how I'm seeing things going down here. But ultimately, we go into page 7, and it's All Might saying, like, hey guys, get ready. We're pretty close to getting the big intel. This page is one of the critical pages. And I think when you look at it, the things that All Might is saying do not capture the intensity of what he is thinking internally. So on this page, just to give you the example, All Might tells everyone that he knows his body has limits, but when you look at the internal dialogue, you see him saying he's going to crawl through the mud if that's what it takes to join the fight with the kids. And then you have him saying later on that he wants to catch up to the kids and show them that he can catch up with them. Now this is the first big issue. All Might in this panel seems to have drunk some of the Kool-Aid that Stain had given him, and the problem I have here is specifically him saying that he will crawl through the mud if that's what it takes to follow the kids around. That is exceedingly concerning, because that makes it sound like All Might's going to be doing stupid things, like he's going to be getting involved on the field. Honestly, at this point, I think this is not good. All Might's a workaholic, and this makes it feel like he's ultimately going to run himself into an early grave. And this is where you have the conflicting rhetorics. This is again All Might's workaholic tendencies versus Night Eye's, hey, take a break. So now we have to kind of play that game. Is All Might ultimately going to become that workaholic again? Or is this just figurative? Is he saying this as to just say the intensity of what he wants to do, but he's going to actually be really reasonable? Is he going to take a supporting role, or is he going to throw himself into the actual scene? Now mind ya, if you want to kill off All Might, you throw him into the actual scene, which is what makes all this much more dangerous. This is going to really depend on how this ultimately executes. If All Might is out there willy-nilly, getting in the field, versus going out into the field at the most desperate moment to make that one significant difference, you know, the execution is going to be the thing that ultimately says how smart All Might is being here. Now, when we're talking about competing rhetorics, not only do you have what Night Eye has said to All Might, but you also have what Aizawa has said. And Aizawa's rhetoric comes in with the idea of just Yue is a safe place. So I'm going to reference here chapter 2, chapter 257. And it's funny because this just feels like a nice continuation. On this page, you had All Might saying, whenever the students grow and learn, I end up frustrated I can't do anything for them. It's torture. Aizawa points it out. You can't cure a workaholic. But then Aizawa says you can do plenty for them. You can live. You can be here with them. For a lot of people, that's all the push they need. And I think Aizawa is ultimately very right here. So this is the conflicting rhetoric. You have Aizawa coming in and saying, hey, rest. Take it easy. Just be moral support. That's okay. You've done your part. But then you have All Might saying, I'll crawl through the mud, bruh. I'm ready. I'll get down and dirty. I don't know my limits. I'm gonna do whatever I can. And this one is a really tough situation because you understand the heart that's in it. But workaholic tendencies are All Might's critical flaw. We've seen what this has done to people. We've seen what this has done to All Might when it comes to Izuku. All Might couldn't speak to Izuku. All Might was too scared to ultimately go up to Night-Eye and speak to him before he was on his deathbed. This is actually a critical issue when it comes to All Might. We really should be very scared about this. And again, for me, the fact that he's not saying he's going to crawl through the mud out loud to the kids, that's very concerning. Anyway, before I move into Izuku, worth pointing out that whatever Stain's given them, there's new intel, and that intel is going to lead to actual answers. So pretty much you have to think about Stain as giving the heroes the key to go find more information. Everything that All Might says here is that Stain has only facilitated and not really given everything away. And now the question is really how Stain got that information and what he could have gotten. I have my ideas. I'll let you know at the end. Now, next thing, the next conflicting rhetoric is when Izuku tells him that those lunchboxes gave him the strength to go on, and then says that he got messed up because he didn't have All Might around. Now, this is very subtle. And again, this is an issue of nuance. You can understand what Izuku is saying, like, yeah, you know, Izuku probably wouldn't have been that crazy had All Might been with him the entire time. But remember the fundamental premise as to what made Bakugo go after Izuku. Bakugo was concerned because All Might and Izuku were together, because they would have enabled each other. See, the thing that happens here when Izuku says this is that he's making it seem like this is all on him. He's making it seem as if All Might being with him would have made a difference. I think maybe it would have slowed it down if you're being generous. But remember, we already saw Izuku looking pretty bad when he was attacking this, or when he was taking down the second assassin. Izuku was going on ahead and All Might was following. Izuku already was on a pretty bad path the moment he saw the Gaunt getting blown up. This is where the nuance really comes in here. When Izuku says that he got messed up because he didn't have All Might around, I think that is fundamentally false, given what ultimately instigated Bakugo, because I think Bakugo is more correct on this one than he is, and also given Izuku's tendencies in general. Izuku would still have gotten away from All Might, and when I say that, I mean he would have gotten ahead of All Might. Izuku would have still kind of run his body ragged. Even if he let All Might follow him around, there's still a good chance that Izuku would have been ignoring All Might, because that's what Izuku did to the vestiges. Izuku ignored the people who died by All For One's hands, who have a vested interest in him and taking down All For One. When you have that kind of character, you can't just say that All Might being around would have fixed this when you have another character flat out saying his workaholic tendencies compromised the whole thing. No. Ultimately, with Izuku, he wants to take all the blame here, and he wants to say it's because of that he ended up where he was. But I think, arguably, the way that we see them interact, with Izuku only meeting up with All Might for a small little bit before dashing off for the next person in trouble, that behavior set would have continued. Now, when it comes to ultimately Bakugo and the rest trying to stop Izuku, I do think if All Might's around, that might go down a little bit easier. But given that Izuku also doesn't like listening to people, and given that All Might ultimately wasn't able to say anything to him at the critical moment, yeah, no. That relationship, I think Bakugo was ultimately right. I think Izuku's trying to take the blame here. Now, the question here is whether or not the author is going to make Izuku look incorrect about this more aggressively. Because when it comes to manga, readers do have a habit of listening to the last person who spoke. So they might take Izuku's word for gospel here, and then the only thing that will overwrite that is something in the future. The issue here is, with All Might's tendencies looking uncorrected in the panel before, we might be in a situation later on where Izuku's assertion here isn't challenged, but we do see the problems of All Might's behaviors. And the way to really show that off is if All Might ultimately dies because of his workaholic tendencies. If All Might dies and he has a final word with Izuku, we have to kind of wonder if All Might's going to tell Izuku that he was wrong for saying it was only because of this one factor that Izuku got that messed up. You know, because All Might's the only one that could actually go up to him and tell him, no, Izuku, it wasn't just because you didn't have me around. It was because I didn't do a good enough job stopping you early on. Again, this is another thing. When Izuku says that it's all because he separated from All Might, Izuku ultimately just kind of brushes over All Might's legitimate problems with Night Eye. And that in of itself is a problem because the manga looks like it likes doing this only to set up All Might for more failure later on. So if we're looking at it in terms of pattern, this again is very concerning because it ultimately leads into a situation where characters aren't talking about All Might's real, or actually people do talk about his problems, but in this case Izuku isn't talking about All Might's real problem, and at this point it puts it in a position where only Bakugo so far has actually said it out loud, All Might's problems. So I ultimately find this a very complex situation. You know, right now my gut instinct here is to say that in Izuku brushing over this and taking all the blame, he has blinded himself to All Might's real problems. He has disregarded All Might's apology. He is not seeing fault within All Might. He is ultimately overlooking All Might's very real suffering when he's constantly thinking of Night Eye. And we put ourselves in the position where All Might will be relatively unchecked in Izuku's eyes and might do something stupid. So in terms of the future, the big question is, will All Might correct Izuku? Or will he fall victim to his horrible habits? We'll have to see. We move on to page 8. We have a wonderful idea of together, let's work together. Good that Izuku has learned that. We have All Might saying that he wants to catch up to the kids. We have All Might saying he's going to leave to go join Endeavor's group because he has other matters to attend to. We have Tokoyami telling All Might to at least tell Hawks to send Tokoyami an email, which again, concerning. At this point, we got to really be wondering, is that email ultimately going to reach Tokoyami? It was very nice to see him so concerned, however. And then we move into, I think, ultimately a very interesting conversation here when it comes to Shoto, with him saying that Endeavor doesn't want to be around other people if he doesn't have a good reason to because of the threat Dobby represents. Okay, that's totally fair. If you're doing it for threat level, I get it. In the spoiler video, I was pretty harsh on this point just because of the way that the spoilers were making it sound. Ultimately, I think I want to see how people react to Endeavor being there. I want to see it viscerally because Miguel, one of the commenters, made a really good point that Shoto might just be acting out of fear and anxiety and not really be looking at the real situation here. I personally really enjoy that Shoto says out loud that not everyone had a change of heart, because that leads into the idea that this is a very hard thing. And ultimately, I think that gives a lot of leeway for more pushback from the civilians later on, if they need to do that. Now, I am ultimately really saddened that people would still think that Shoto is a concern. I agree with Kirishima when he says that's really heavy drama. And I also like Shoto saying that he was obsessed with the blood in his veins and he lost sight of his origin. Now, ideally, I hope he acknowledges that he fixed that ever since Sports Festival, but you know, this is a fundamental part of Shoto's character, so I understand why the author feels he needs to constantly remind us that Shoto was obsessed with his lineage. This was a thing that kept coming back over and over and over. So I do ultimately, looking at this page in the official release, I appreciate it. Now, in terms of the visuals, love seeing Jiro, love seeing Momo here. I love seeing Izuku being asleep and Shoto covering him up. I thought that was really cute and adorable. Shoto was coming in with that blanket from very early on. Really neat. Page 10. I look at this page and I'm thinking, alright, this is like a page saying Shoto's gonna die. This looks like the face of a man that's gonna die. Personally, one of my theories is that Shoto dies and Endeavor has to be the one to see that. Personally, I hope it doesn't happen, but this is a dead man walking, man. Like, oh my god. But I like that. I like the overall story. He says he's changed. I know he's changed. We've seen that from the moment Sports Festival happened. Like, heck, man. Remember when Shoto's mom was talking about Shoto changing? And Shoto's thinking back to the time that, or Shoto being the hero of their family, and Shoto's thinking back to that time where Izuku really talked to him, therefore making Izuku the real hero of the family. The fact of the matter is, we know this already, and what I'm looking at here is specifically that the author is bringing it back up. So, narratively, the author is bringing it back up on page 9 and 10, I believe, just because he wants to remind readers that, hey, the Shoto plotline is a significant plotline in Hero Academia, so just keep that in mind. We're going to have a big rhetoric about Shoto reclaiming himself or claiming himself in front of Dabi. That's probably what's going to happen. It's kind of silly that we have to, run around this circle again with Shoto and have him claim himself again, but this is where we are. Now, the worry thing is new. That is a new part of the rhetoric, because we haven't really seen Shoto concerned about people worrying about him. But that's one of the things that really makes me feel kind of scared about the guy. Now, here's where we go into another interesting part. You have Jiro saying that the evacuees haven't necessarily had a change of heart. She agrees, but then she acknowledges that the situation is not the same, but she brings the band back together. And you ultimately have her saying, if we're trying to reassure people and bring smiles to the face, I might just have an idea. Now, I still have mild concerns with this. And this is, again, another nuanced situation where, yes, I understand wanting to make people feel better and make them forget about their problems, but people have quite literally abandoned their homes. There's quite literally explosions going off in the background. There's people who want to do you harm right outside the walls. It does feel a little bit detached to think this would be okay to do. And this is just such a tricky situation, because the way this works, it all depends on the consequences. If the kids do something elaborate to make people feel better and no consequences come from that, then great. Actually, legitimately great, because that means the kids got lucky, plot armor came in, no one's going to call them out because everything went well. You know how the world is. When things are good, no one really calls out anything because everyone's really happy. Now, if you have the kids do this thing, and this, whatever they want to do to bring, whatever this idea is, if something ultimately goes wrong because this thing happened, then the kids are open to criticism. Then people online, when it comes to the fandom, they're going to be 100% attacking the kids, because, when it comes to the fandom, it's a lot easier when they actually have justifiable reason to attack the kids. If something terrible happens here, you're going to see a lot of conversation about the kids being stupid in general. So this is a really unfortunate situation where the final results will ultimately dictate how people talk about this particular idea. At the end of the day, with these kids, I think it's cool to want to give people some little bit of happiness, but I do kind of question the timing, and ultimately this is one of those things that, as long as nothing goes wrong, I think everything will be okay. But if something does go wrong, time to start criticizing, why was this a good idea? But we'll have to see what happens in the future. If the author does this, hopefully he just keeps it happy and doesn't make it go negative. We move into page 13, which is another wonderful page of Jiro. The author's really good at drawing Jiro. Now, in terms of what I think is interesting here, I think it's the final panel where she says, because it's not only about bringing it all the way, because it's not only about bringing it all back the way it was, we gotta work to make the world a better place than before, and we'll do it together. I think that's a cool thought. Unfortunately for me, I look at that and I think, are you guys actually capable of that? How many of you are actually capable of complex thought? And this is also like on a meta note. As far as I'm concerned, the people who typically handle the tough stuff are the adults. Can the kids really make the world a better place at their current level? Like, I think when they're adults and they're dealing with a lot more real issues, it's just because, like, when it comes to making the world a better place than before, this isn't just about taking out villains. This is about helping people that are ostracized by society. This is about helping people whose quirks cause them to have weird relationships in the real world, like Toga or La Brava. It's about helping out people like Spinner. It's about being able to look past Shigaraki and being able to help him. Can these kids actually make the world a better place right now? Well, we'll have to see what exactly the author wants to do with them. All that said, it's really good thoughts, but, we're walking a kind of thin line here. And all I can really say is that I hope that the author doesn't make this lead into a negative. I'd rather this just stay a positive thing so we can all be happy about it. Also, speaking of happy things, look at Shoto's face, look at Mineta's face. That was hilarious. Page 13 is just a hopeful page. There's nothing really I can add there. Then we go into the real hardcore stuff. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. You were having a nice time. Everything in UA looks pretty. Boom. You go into page 14. You have destruction right on the side. You have the guys driving down the sea, and it's like they're talking about villains. Right? This is the dichotomy between them. You have the kids being like behind their closed walls, all safe. Like, guys, let's throw a concert or something. And then you have the heroes just being like, alright, shit sucks. We are using polygraphs. We're trying to figure this out. We have Central Hospital, praise Central Hospital, doing their best trying to figure out what's going on with the Nomu. Meanwhile, the kids are goofing around. Yeah, this is the epitome of Hero Academia. But that is ultimately the real big issue there. Just with the narrative of Hero Academia, the kids don't really do hardcore things unless you're like the core 5 or 6. Anyway, this was an interesting page. White Despair, commenter, and I really talked about this because we were trying to figure out where exactly are they going. Because there might be a misdirect happening here. Like when you see the people driving down the seaside, it's like, well, they might be going to Tartarus to check something out. But it's just so odd. So let's walk through this. So the second panel with Hawks. What we find out here is pretty much Garaki's been polygraph test. And we also have the research from Central Hospital. What they're really saying here is that Central Hospital's information is kind of lining up with Garaki. And the reason they're doing that is just to say that we have reason to believe in this information. We then move in to the thing about the assassins. That being, let me read this. The info squares with a testimony from the assassins. So the assassins pretty much spoke. All for One's trying to get his mitts on One for All before Shigaraki's body is perfected. Why he wants to do that, I don't really know. I don't know what he's planning. It's All for One. I do think it's really funny that all these people were told that they were to get Izuku, but these people did not coordinate. Personally, when I see someone like Dictator, this is someone that should have coordinated with someone else. And White Despair always makes this comment that All for One doesn't seem very smart. You know, at this rate, I really think All for One's going to have a big moment where he's going to say to everyone, ha ha ha, but I was planning that all along, because that's who All for One is. But when you see these people, and also like the one monster-looking guy, and that they were all assassins, and they were all attacking Izuku one by one, it's like, alright, All for One, look man, just explain why you had that thought process, and we can all laugh at you later. Like, All for One's not the smartest. And I know, people like saying that All for One is, like, super smart. But I agree with a lot of people that pull back on this, and it's like, no, he's not really smart. He's been caught off guard many times before. We've seen him be caught off guard many times before. This All for One is a genius. It's really only coming about now in this recent era, but, like, All for One pre-Kamino, the guy was just, he was reacting. He was in a hardcore reaction. But yeah, no, All for One, always wonderful. Anyway, we find out that the attack on Tartarus was a month ago, so they have a month of wiggle room. And then we have an interesting thing on page 15, where it's a kind of a turn of thought, where Hawks says, that's what we thought. Now, the fan translation made it seem like that was a turn of phrase, him saying, however, that's what we thought at that point in time, making it seem like there's more information that they've gotten that changes the timeline. And then that leads us into the whole thing about what Stain gave us. It's wonderful that Stain actually just wrote a love letter to All Might. I think that was hilarious. And then we have the ever wonderful line of Hawk saying, who would have thought that the hero killer would end up a hero ally? And all I'm thinking is, I knew. Everyone that heard Horikoshi, or everyone that read Horikoshi saying that Stain was a dark hero, knew that Stain was somehow going to help the heroes. Now, what I really enjoy is that Horikoshi did not shy away from this. He still made Stain crazy. He still calls Stain a zealot. I'm 100% happy with his depiction, because like you look at Stain last chapter and it's like, alright, pretty entertaining, but yo bro, you're really crazy. And ultimately, you don't really want to be on the side of a zealot. Like, yeah, you know, zealots, they all have one thing in common. That is, they have one very, very, very small detail that you look at and you're like, alright, that's pretty cool, but then it's just wrapped up in so much crazy. So ideally, you don't want to be with the zealot, because that you don't want to be a religious zealot, and that's who Stain ultimately is. So I do love the consistency of Stain's characterization. I do love that we are still very willing to make fun of him. And yeah, this is what we need in the world. We need to make sure that zealots are laughed at. Now, as for where they're going, I really, my first instinct is Tartarus, because Tartarus has many parts to it. We do have this one panel here. This, to me, we talked about it on the live stream. It looks to me like this is the bridge, but I really don't know. I can't tell well enough what's going on in this picture, so I would love to get your guys' thoughts. Now, moving on from there, I think it is worthwhile that we all understand what exactly Stain wrote to All Might here. And I'm going to try and read you what I can see here. Only a true hero may act as the recipient of this information. This disqualifies the outlaws who wear false mantles and act solely out of contemptible self-interest. All Might is the only hero worthy of any respect. All Might is the only worthy one of ending my life. Now more than ever, the masses cry out for that unshakable sense of justice that he embodies. That pure absolute justice. The world has grown dark indeed, which is precisely why the symbol of peace must stand the vanguard and lead us all. Something about society information is great. Yeah, just I love that the translator actually went through the trouble of writing that out, because that was gold. Anyway, that was chapter 327. The editorial for this chapter is next. We're going to find out something about the villains. Will we actually see the villains, or will we find out information? I don't know. What could Stain have gotten in the security records from Tartarus? Well, you know, knowing All For One, he might have just said his plan out loud, which would be wonderful. If we find All For One monologuing in front of villains, I would think this is the greatest thing in the world. All For One automatically becomes the greatest villain of the world if he gets caught out monologuing to his villain buddies. That would just be great. It would just, oh wow, it would make my day. Anyway, guys, I gotta run. That was chapter 327. Let me know what you thought down below. Ultimately, I think it's a really interesting chapter, and it's one that I am concerned about for the future, but I think this is ultimately something. Every concern that I have here really depends on the execution in the future. Anyway, everyone, let me know what you thought down below. Until next time, hope you have an absolutely great day.